thrilled today to be talking about Ford versus Ferrari. So if I can have Paul Massey and come on up. And Don Sylvester and Dave Giammarco, come on up, please. Paul, I haven't seen you since you won your Oscar for Bohemian Rhapsody. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks. It was a joy to work on, definitely.
Yeah, we had a couple of fun conversations about that one,
yes.
didn't we? Not every, like I said, people haven't seen this movie yet. I feel very fortunate because I got to see it at the Telluride Film Festival, which was actually the first time that anybody saw the movie. And it's I can tell you, you're in for a really fun experience when you watch this movie because it's just a great, kind of almost like an old-fashioned, just really entertaining movie with great characters. And of course, the thing that you can always expect from a movie from James Mangold is just impeccable craftsmanship. All the departments in this movie are working at the top of their game. And the sound department is obviously no exception. Now, you guys have had a pretty good run with James. I think you guys have worked with him ever since it started with Walk the Line, right? Back in like 2005?
Yeah, I actually first met Jim in this room. He was mixing Girl Interrupted in the late 90s. And I did a little bit of work on that, but I wasn't the main mixer. And then moved to Fox, and I've done 6 films with Jim now, starting with Walk the Line. And we've all worked with him before.
Me too. Yeah, I met him in 2005 with Walk the Line. That was my first experience. He's a pretty great guy to hitch your wagon to. Mm-hmm. He knows what he wants, and it's been a great experience.
To me, it's really exciting to witness a long-term collaboration between a director and a sound team. And I'm wondering if you guys can just talk a little bit about how that work goes with Jim. How much what kind of a presence does he have on the mixing stage? Is he one of those directors that's on the mix all day, every day, or does he just come in for playbacks and say, "Oh, you guys did a great job, thanks"?
Neither. So Jim's a delight to work with. He I mix the dialogue and music, so he gives me an awful lot of latitude in experimenting with music presentations to him. And I feel like you can do a very nice sort of sparring back and forth with him in presenting ideas and having his input. And I always feel like at the end of a project with Jim, we've come up with something that neither one of us would have done on our own, but that he, collaboratively has taken us to another level. And he doesn't sit there and go through every single little detail with you. He'll actually go crazy if he does that. He'll pace up and down, and every time you hit play, he'll be, but the door's too big. No, the car's too oh no, and you have to turn around.
You're like, I am only working on one thing at a time.
I know. I have to say, Jim, the amount of times I've said to him, please, it's going to take me like 5 passes to get close to where you want. Just and he's like, do you want me to leave? Yes, leave. But in a nice way. And he comes back, and it likes to see an overall presentation. And then we can take it to the next level. It's really a joy to work with.
Don and David, can you talk a little bit about how you guys collaborate and work together? Because Don, you're the sound supervisor. Dave, you are the sound designer, and you mix the effects with Paul, right? So how do you guys kind of divvy things up between you?
Well, I'm embedded in the picture department. I think that's pretty common now. What that means is I'm in the room a lot when Jim is making observations and notes, and if I'm not, I'm only a shout away, which is literally what happens. Don! And I come running, and he goes, "Here's my note. Do this, do that, do this, do this, do that. Thanks." And then I leave. So I have a very thick notebook of tiny little notes that I take 17 times a day. And so I never miss anything because I'm always there. It's great. And he'll forget the note, but I won't. So that's one of the great things about working so close to him. And then also, he's kind of like, what he lets me do or makes me do is he wants to view a scene that's completely filled out with sound, music, right from the very start, like the very first cut of the scene. It's going to have music and cars and sound effects and then he'll give the notes. So I have to sort of pre-plan the roadmap of where we're going to go. And then he'll tell me, you're going the wrong way, you're going the right way. But that's how he gives notes. He can't listen to anything unless it's completely done, as if it's a tiny mix, a tiny final, really. And that's his pattern. He wants to think of it as a movie from from the very inception of the scene. He wants a movie. And if it doesn't qualify as a good movie yet, at least he'll have the chance to start giving notes from the very beginning. And then Dave, you can talk.
Well, Don started very early on, and then Jay Wilkinson came on. He was also sound designing, and the two of them did a lot of initial work and like getting things to the picture editors. And for Jim, I came on a bit later, and then it was preparing these scenes that Don's talking about, getting things cut ready, get them over to picture, and then build the track in their Avid with what we had. Get to a temp dub stage when we had a length of quite a bit of time to work with Jim and really kind of hone where this was going to go. And then we just built upon that until we got to the final mix and then started pre-dubs and finals.
Yeah, but we made about 100 finals in between.
Well, I wanted to ask about can you kind of walk us through sort of what the mixing process was on the show? You mentioned temp mixes, were there test screenings, typical kind of test screenings? How many temps did you do, and then what was the process and sort of timeline around the pre-dubs and the final?
I think we did one temp in February and another in March, and then so the first one was the big one, and then I think we started pre-dubbing mid-April. And so it was just building on the track. The first temp was quite strong, and then we built upon that for final. And so when we started pre-dubbing, it was, we were pretty close. We were well built, but he hadn't heard what we brought yet, what more we've added. So that was getting him in early on the pre-dub stage, have him walk in and hear what we'd done. I finished the first reel, and we showed him, brought him in, and played him some clips from reel one.
Just the sound effects.
Sound effects with dialogue, temp dialogue and temp music. But he heard it, and he loved it, and we knew we were off and running and going the right way. So it was pretty exciting for us.
In the beginning, Jim was obsessed with the length of the film. He thought it was too long. And so every day it was like, what can we cut? What can we cut? What we cut? And we were like, well, this is pretty important, and that's pretty important. And so our first test screening, they asked the audience how, it's too long, right? And they went, no. And he was like, got it. Nothing's coming out.
Yeah, I mean, the movie is what, 2.5, 240? No?
212, is it?
Oh, 212.
No, it's in the,
Is it?
yeah, it's around there.
Okay, I thought it was about 2.5, but
I think you're right.
I saw that I could have taken another hour. I thought it was just I was that invested in the characters, and it's great stuff.
That's been I think the audience reaction all the way through. It seems a bit formidable to go in and watch a 2.5 hour movie, but people just want more, which is great.
Would y'all like to see a scene? Yeah. The first clip that we have is from it's the Willow Springs raceway scene from 1963. So the two main characters in the film are Ken Miles and Carol Shelby, who are played by Christian Bale and Matt Damon. So this is a scene. Probably is this from reel one? It's from early in the film, and we're kind of establishing their characters and who they are as people. At the very beginning of the scene, IRS agents come to Ken Miles' shop, and we learn that he's in kind of dire straits financially, so that he's got a lot riding on this. And then we go right into sort of this is kind of a preliminary trial race, and so you'll get this is really sort of the first sort of time that we see Ken Miles driving. So you'll get a sense of who these two characters are and their interplay with each other, and then the way these guys handle these amazing race sequences. Do you want to say anything before we start about what's the car that Ken's driving? Anything we need to set
It's
that
a
up?
Ford Cobra.
Okay,
And
it's
this is early on in Ken's not his career, but he's not a known name really at this point. He's doing small circuits, and we're just establishing the dynamic between Matt Damon and Christian Bale. We haven't gotten into any of the big corporation deals with Ford or Ferrari at this point in the film.
Great. Let's roll the first clip.
I'm gonna outbrake you on the next turn, Bob! Nice try, Bob!
Nice move from 10 miles. 22 laps remaining with Bill Hill and Dan Gurney in the lead.
Does it make you want to watch more? It's really extraordinary work. There's a lot of racing in this movie.
There is.
We're going to show some scenes from the very famous Le Mans race a little bit later. But how of the running length of the film? I feel like there's a good at least 30 or 40 minutes of the movie that is in race sequences, especially the Le Mans scene at the end. That's a big part of the last third of the movie.
Yeah, Le Mans is about 45 minutes.
Le Mans sequence is 45 minutes long.
No, I think it's longer than 25. Yeah.
I haven't seen it yet.
I'm going to go with Don on this one. How do you build a race car sequence that's that long and keep it interesting?
Well, it is 24
acoustically?
hours.
But no, I mean, but for building you're making a movie, building a movie sequence for an audience, which is race car driving. How do you modulate and how do you approach it and keep it interesting for a good length of time?
Well, the sequence that we're talking about at the end of the film, which is the what everything's building up to, the main Le Mans race, is really about 4 acts as you start to dissect it. And we had to spend an awful lot of time going through, like in that sequence there was no music going on apart from the little internal moment. But in the large 45-minute sequence, we had to sort of break it down into where do we need the excitement to occur, both musically and from the effects standpoint, and when does the race become emotional and hopefully not boring. Obviously at the beginning of the race, there's everyone's full on, huge cars, huge music, it's very exciting, people trying to get into the lead. But as the race evolves, we get sort of 10 hours into a 24-hour race. You can't keep that level of excitement up. It just becomes incredibly boring for the audience and tedious to listen to. So we had to really pick our moments, Dave and I, in the final, to weave the music in and out and see where we're going to take over with emotion, or where we're going to take over with pure racing, and just lead the audience into the feelings that Jim wanted to portray, while at the same time, hopefully making it build from the beginning of the race to the end to a peak, certainly emotionally. While it's obvious that there's a lot of racing, there's a lot of car sounds and all the rest, and excitement in the film, which is great. There's also an underlying character development and story about people that carries the film through from top to bottom, and kudos to Jim for writing that and to allowing that to happen. So we took a long time, is I guess the short answer. We took a long time going through sequences, taking out music, taking out effects, recomposing music, going with emotion or going with raw effects, to try and shape that. in the final.
Well, there's a wonderful moment in the scene that we just showed, where I think part of what you're talking about too is you have to modulate, right? You have to play with the dynamic range, and there's that really lovely moment when you're really in the thick of the race and things are heating up, and then you almost pull most of the effects away. You go very sort of internal into Christian Bale's head, and I'm hearing his breath really present through his nostrils, and I love sound design that does that sort of like that puts me into the emotional experience of the character, and the movie's full of moments like that.
Yeah, and that one's a little bit odd, out of context for you all now, but it relates to an earlier scene in the film, and hopefully makes sense when you see the film in context.
The funny thing is that Christian he came into the cutting room and he saw that scene, and he went crazy. He said, we need that, more of that. And Jim goes, oh yeah, oh yeah. So
So did you do an ADR breathing session with Christian Bale just through his nostrils?
Oh, he's great. He's so good at breathing. Well, we ended up putting that internal moment into other scenes in the film.
So that wasn't actually part of the original conception for
that one was.
Those, but you found more moments.
But he
during.
said like that's a great thing. He said we should do more, and Jim went, yes, we should do more, and we did do more. Yeah.
Don, can you talk a little bit about what must have been just the monumental challenge of building, putting together the car sounds in the library for the film?
Well, I have to give my secret weapon credit. Jay Wilkinson got on early and tackled the cars, and but I knew from the beginning that we had to get the real cars. I mean, Jay was doing a fantastic job of selling the race, but I knew if we didn't get a GT40, if we didn't get a Ferrari P3, we'd be remiss.
Well, because there are people who will know.
I'm waiting for them. I'm waiting for them to come around an alley and say that wasn't a GT40. It was. This one was. But we looked for GT40s around the world, and we found all the GT40s, and I think we contacted as many as we could. And the funny thing is that if you owned a $30 million car, you don't want people to record it and drive it around a racetrack and have men climbing all over it with microphones. You don't want that. So a lot of people said no, but we did find a guy in Ohio who built his own GT40 out of real GT40 parts, and actually Ford came and inspected it and authorized it as a legitimate GT40 and gave it a serial number.
Really?
Yeah. And
that's amazing.
Bolted on his door, and he let us record that. So we got our GT40. We got it was very, very authentic, and so that made us really happy. And then we found a Ferrari. We couldn't find the real Ferrari. We found a pretty close Ferrari. We found a '59 Testarossa V12, and we recorded that. And we had to do that in Florida because even though the guy owned it in Georgia, the ordinances in Georgia wouldn't let him race it because it was too loud. So we went, great. We want that car. So we took it down to Florida and recorded it there. So those are the two main cars. And I knew that once we got those cars, we had the authority to actually say these are real cars.
What was your secret sauce? How did you mic them? How did you get those recordings?
We used one mic. It's just one mic. No, I don't know. Go ahead, Dave.
John Fasal was the location recordist, and he went out and recorded.
And Eric Potter.
Eric Potter, right. And they mic'd the cars. They had mics on transaxles. They had mics inside. There was all stationary mics outside on the track. And so the cars were quite wide. I had 16 channels of sound for the car interior, and similarly for buys. So it was really, they did a great job. It was all really well recorded, and gave us lots to work with.
Was this a Dolby Atmos mix from the beginning? You guys knew what you were going to do?
Yeah, it was native Atmos.
And so what did that allow you to do, working natively in Atmos in terms of, like the directionality of the car buys is so stunning in the film.
Well, mostly, I mean, it was when we were working in my room. It's 7:1, so I'm just thinking what's going to go in Atmos when I'm working, and so I'll have all my sessions built, and then I'll have Atmos tracks down the bottom. And when I get on the stage, when we got to Fox, it was then I could take things that I wanted to put in the Atmos track. So kind of, as we were going through, I'm thinking what I'm going to use in Atmos, what I'll utilize it for. So
you were working primarily like with 7-1 beds, and then you would keep a certain number of effects that you wanted to use as objects, and when you got to the stage, you would start to move those around.
Yeah, I mean they were used in a 7-1 bed as well. And now I know what this is going to sound like in 7-1 as well when we do the fold down. But knowing I would, tag it or color code it that I'm going to put these in Atmos object tracks, and I used it for crowds and winds and rain, things that went over our heads.
Yeah, we flew a plane through the theater.
It's a great sequence.
It sounded just like that. No, and then musically, that clip, obviously, I think I just realized the clips that we're playing today don't have a lot of music in them. But
it's not that we have anything against music or composers. But we're really proud to show off the extraordinary sound design.
Actually, there's music all over this next one.
Yeah, okay, I'll take it back. But what I was trying to say was, with the music, I had great flexibility from Marco Bertrami and Buck Sanders, who were the composers, and then through Ted Kaplan, who was our music editor. I got all the instruments completely separate and was able to go through premixes that I did at my studio, where I put everything into 5.1 format, but kept everything very, very wide, and then took that to the final, spread into a 7.1 bed, and then started allocating Atmos as needed.
I'm kind of curious, what sort of Atmos work did you do with the music? What did you use as objects that you would either, did you primarily put things into the overheads, or what did you do?
No, not overheads. I always do a 7.1 bed. I never do any, I never use the +2. And then anything I use that goes up there, it becomes an object. But it's environmental parts of the recording of the score, and delays, primarily delays. I do there's a lot of singular guitar work in the score, where there's two guitars playing off of each other, which I kept principally towards the left and principally towards the right as a general template. And then I did a lot of diagonal across the room panning of delays and reverb treatments for each one of those, so that we're not just going front to back, but we're actually moving across the room, and utilize the objects for those also.
And that just opens it up and gives it a sense of size and space.
Sense of size, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious, were there any usable production tracks that came in during the race car sequence? I can imagine that must have been really horrible conditions for the poor production sound mixer.
Well, we had to take away all the production of the cars because they were all kits. They all had Mazda engines or Chevy engines or something like that. And although they were big engines, they weren't the right engines. So with that, when those came out, we had to fill everything back in, and sometimes the dialogue left. But a lot of times the dialogue was cleaned up pretty well by using some isotope.
And Harrison.
And Harrison, and we hired a guy to do it. He was good.
He's got some skills.
Yeah. But the cars had to be completely built from the ground up, and also what's interesting is that this was shot in the desert. This is not shot in Le Mans, and there was no crowds. And so when you see the film, you'll see 100,000 people there. They were all added later, and it's just beautiful to see what they can do visually. And so we had to make that. And so
what you're describing, it's almost like a little bit like an animated film. Like once you took the kit car sounds out, you really had very little.
Yeah, it was a dream come true for me. Yeah, because it was like a blank slate. I mean, you couldn't use the cars, and then of course the shots of them inside the car, that was just a rig, and there was all this kind of going on. I'm good at sound, right? And so everything had to be cleaned up.
Although I will say we took an awful lot to. Polly McKinnon was the dialogue editor. Between her and Don, we managed to take pretty much all the production that was in any way usable into the final mix as extracts. with ADR as alternatives. And once we got the balance of the music and the effects in the bigger races, quite a bit, a surprisingly large amount of the production was able to be used
Well,
if the performance was better.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry. She actually took some engines out of the dialogue, which was unbelievable. What she could, I mean, this really loud engine she pulled out. Amazing.
She did a great job.
Kudos to her. Yeah, that's amazing. Let's take a look at the second clip. So this is we're kind of in the middle of the Le Mans race at this point in the clip. It's like Paul was saying, it's a 24-hour car race, and we're deep into it. It's the middle of the night, and of course, for some added acoustic fun, it's in a terrible rainstorm. So you got a car race in the middle of the night in a big rainstorm, and Carroll Shelby does a little shenanigans with the Ferrari's stopwatches. Do we need to set anything up?
Well, what you're about to see is true. These are little known facts that we once Jim learned about what Carroll Shelby would do in the pit, he included it in the film. So this is a great sort of reveal.
There you go. Let's take a look at this second clip.
Easy done. You're getting boxed in. He's not batting on a full wicket, that one. Easy done. Oh, bloody hell. You arsehole. Smacked arse now, don't you?
Dave, I'd love to hear from you about some of the challenges of putting that sequence together.
That crash of the sign going over was tough. We could never get it right for Jim. We started before there was a sign there. The car goes off and the sign was supposed to be there. And so it hit the hay bales and it hit something and it's like, he needed something hard there. And we kept tackling it. Then the visual came and it just, we went after that for a while till he was ultimately happy, I hope.
You never know what's going to be the thing that is the troublesome element that takes a long time to come together.
That's especially with Jim, I find, because some things I would think that would be big things he's great with, and then it'll be little things that I got to figure out what he's after to really.
I think he was really like pushing for the wood of the sign through the engines and the rain and the hay, and he'll pick certain sounds that he just wants to promote, and it's hard sometimes.
I imagine that's the case, and I'm curious to hear. That was the music is driving pretty. It's pretty present in that scene, and obviously it's just wall to wall sound effects as well. So, can you talk a little bit about how did you guys work together on the stage? Were you slapping each other's hands away from the faders, and what's how do you decide which is going to step forward in a given moment, the music or the sound effects?
Well, little known to Dave, I had a master fader for the effects, so I was just pulling it out. No.
On your phone.
Obviously, we have to. The music in that sequence was very, very rhythmic. It had an awful lot of low end in the bass pattern and the drum pattern, and yet Dave had the roar of the engines. He had all the suspension issues going on. He had the transients of the foot pedals coming in and out. I ended up having to, throughout that section, we just worked very closely together with it, but from a music standpoint, I had to pull out an awful lot of the low-end rhythm in that sequence and sort of trick the audience into thinking the music's still going by using the top end of the guitars and the hi-hat and such, while the engine roars were taking that frequency spectrum. there was just no point competing. And likewise, he would let go when there was a melodic pattern that needed to come through.
And for me too, I'm always working against Paul's music, and then trying to hit key things. So it's not just engine all the time. I want to hear the rain and the wheel well, like just things that are quick in and out that can play with the music and not just be loud and big against music with engine all the time. So it was kind of working that way until it's feeling really good.
Well, that kind of detail and finesse, I mean, it just takes time, right? So I'm curious, Dave, for you, like how much, you were building your tracks in 7.1, kind of pre-mixing even before you got to the stage, but like how much time did you pre-mix before you guys got to the final stage? And did you have access to the music during that period at all, or it was just going to be a surprise for you when you got on?
No, I had access, was the temp music for spotting purposes, but the score came in when we finaled that, and we had 3 weeks to pre-dub in the big stage, on the Ford stage.
Were you guys pre-dubbing at the same time on two separate stages, or were you okay?
Yeah, I was mixing in my studio.
You were
dialogue.
You were pre-dubbing dialogue, and you were pre-dubbing effects for 3 weeks on your own before you came to the final mix stage. But I mean, it sounds like a long time, but it is a 2.5-hour movie, and there's a lot going on. And then the final mix was how long?
1 day.
6 weeks, I think. Well, with all of the reviews and all of the print masters and all of the deliverables, it was 6 weeks. So take a couple of weeks off of that for deliverables. It's about a month. But Aaron Downing, the post supervisor at Fox on the film, was insistent on just trying to keep people civilized. So we didn't do long days, which was fantastic. We didn't really do weekends. It was Monday to Friday, and it was about 8 o'clock, sort of latest. I did prior to the final, I did 2 weeks on dialogue, ADR, and group, and then 5 days on the music before we got to the final.
Yeah. Well, that's great because I mean there's so much material in here, and it tends to be a little loud. It's good to have those normal work days just to prevent burnout.
Yeah,
and
we
fatigue.
were really grateful for that.
Yeah, it helped.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, for a scene like that too, the great thing was that we would have the time alone to do it and build the track. Like we'd do a faders up run with Jim in the morning, present the reel, and then we would go and work. He would go away, we would work on it, get it to a place where we're close and comfortable, and then finesse when he would come back.
And an interesting thing is they're always adding rain. That's visually added. There was points where we went really heavy with rain visually, and so when we matched it sonically, Jim didn't like it. It was eating up everything, and so they reduced the amount of rain in the picture.
This is twice a day we've heard this, that they actually changed the picture to make the sound better.
Yeah.
I think this is a trend that we should embrace.
I agree.
That's great. Should we look at the last clip?
Sure.
So we're going a little bit out of order. This chronologically in the film, this last clip happens before the Le Mans race. This is I want to set this up properly. This is my favorite scene in the movie. So they're embarking on this huge project, the Ford Corporation, to build this car that will compete at Le Mans and compete against the Ferraris, who have had a tight grip on this race for a long, long, long time. So they're well into the process, but there's a little bit of an internal power struggle happening between Carroll Shelby and some executives at the Ford company. So they're kind of coming out to LAX to where Shelby and his team are building the car to kind of do a power play, and Carroll Shelby surprises them and gives Mr. Ford an impromptu ride in his very expensive race car and kind of gives him the ride of his life. So let's take a look at this scene.
Open the door! Hey, open the door! Open the door!
Just to hold me right there, and you take my hand. Oh, God! Sat on my nuts.
We're gonna build the next one for comfort, don't you worry.
Open the door.
Sorry, sir. If you just give me a moment.
Open the door!
You ready?
The name on the middle of that steering wheel should tell you that I was born ready, Shelby. Hit it.
Attaboy.
Oh, that's got a little kick, doesn't it? Whoa.
Open the door! There we go. Good God, Mr. Beebe. You okay, sir?
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! Yeah, baby! Yeah,
baby! Great performance by Tracy Letts as Ford.
Definitely.
I think that that scene also gives you a sense of it's when we talk about this movie, it's really easy to focus on, let's talk about the big race car scenes but there's great character and it's great story and it's great storytelling and sound serves an amazing part of that process. So talk a little bit about putting that, because obviously you want the audience to have the same experience that Mr. Ford is having in that moment. So how do you put the sound together for that? A lot of low end, obviously.
Well, first you take away the production car, and then you add the real car, and then you just crank it to 11. And I think part of the powerful thing about that is when it stops, you get the sense of what it really was. And we're really fortunate that when we turned off the engine, the airport was still there, but it was not. It was just air, basically.
There's a great. I'm not sure if anyone noticed, but at the very end when Ford is crying, that is all production, obviously, and
Right.
we try to enhance and keep with every single one of his little sobs. But back deep in the background, there's a single engine sort of Piper Cherokee flying around, and that was live production that happened to be happening at the time. And it's just a wonderful little moment of the scale of this massive monster of a car down to a tiny little engine that's going over the top as he's crying and realizing how difficult it is to control this machine. So it's a great moment. I love that moment.
Jim says, "Yeah, take that plane and lower it, raise it," or it's like, no, it's just right there, Jim. We didn't add it.
We actually tried to remove it
Yeah.
for a while, and it was ridiculous because the crying was so wonderful to
Was
hold
so
on
perfect.
to. Yeah.
The irony is that Piper airplane probably had less horsepower than the car that they were driving.
Yes.
Before we open up for questions, any fun final stories that you want to tell about the mix process or working with James?
It's always an adventure working with James. He's a joy to work with. He truly is. He's so smart. He's so about storytelling. He challenges all these different genres, from Logan to Walk the Line to 310 to Yuma to this film. He does everyone's with such finesse, and he's truly interested in sound. More than interested, he's passionate about sound, and it's just great to work with him.
He's a director who seems to know how to use sound really as a storytelling tool. I didn't even congratulate you guys on Logan, but Logan is one of really my favorite superhero movie from the past 10 years or so.
Great.
Let's open up and take some questions. Mike, do you have a microphone? Any questions for these guys?
Hey guys, thanks for coming out. I'm curious, with all the amount of cars you guys had on the show and the amount of recording, how'd you guys manage editorial-wise and track layout and being able to keep things interesting from editorial to mix?
Track layout, I kept, I had 4 predubs for the GT40, and they were all 16 channels wide, 4 for the Ferraris, and then I had incidental cars, tires and suspension were all separate, and crashes separate, design of predubs separate. So I had like 26 effects predubs, and so that was really helpful for me for separation wise. And I had like 24 to 30 channels of props and 24 channels of feet. So I just kept my groups separate. Does that answer your question?
Hey, how's it going, guys? Congrats on a great sounding film. So my question was, obviously you owe some amount of realism to the cars that you talked about in the edit and in the design process. I'm wondering if you, at different points in the film, decided to enhance any of that with either elements from cars that weren't specific to those, or whether you used like non-diegetic type design to enhance, to beef things up or make it more sort of larger than life, or did you pretty much try to, as a rule, stick to the raw stuff that you guys got from Eric and John?
Well, I'm going to say that this is pretty much a real deal thing. I mean, like in any movie, you're going to augment certain areas that don't match the picture because you don't, when you're recording, you don't know how it's going to be cut in. There was a point where we were using other cars in the temps, very early on, and they were great, but Jim kept asking for more and more and more, and I kept saying, well, when we get the real cars, then you can ask for more and more and more, because we're asking for the wrong more at the moment, so.
Yeah, all the cars running, as you know, for the GT40 and the Ferrari, that's the cars. They're sometimes on the buys and things we would enhance them just for impact, but it's the cars running by and large for the most part.
And the good news was that those engines were dramatic and big enough on their own that they didn't need a lot of help.
Yeah, the only issue was we really weren't allowed to take the cars onto a track and run them at 220 miles an hour. Because A, the driver was the owner and he wouldn't do it, and B, we didn't have a 3-mile track to do it. So part of that was trickery, just to make it seem like it was going that speed. But they're the engines, for sure.
I'm curious about like how did you translate, especially in the first clip, like it really felt like the car was far away, and then like it just had a lot of depth to it. How did you like translate that sound like in the mixing stage?
If it was in a long shot, we had exterior miking on cars, so it was probably used from perspective, and then I'd use some reverb and delays to kind of put some space around us, but trying to use mic positions that would be applicable to where it was geographically on the track.
That's important because there's only really so far that you can go taking a close mic'd object and trying to give the illusion that it's way far away. It's really helpful to have that variation in the miking positions when you're recording to have.
Do you guys deal with ear fatigue, like long scenes of motors and all that? Do you discuss that with Jim, and how do you handle it?
You're talking about ear fatigue, like from the audience? Like we don't want to exhaust the audience as they're going through the film?
Exactly, like using silence or mixing trickery.
Do you mean when we're mixing during days of mixing, or do you mean as an audience watches the film? Sorry.
Yeah, for the audience.
For the audience. Well, I think, in terms of the mix itself, the mixed days, as I mentioned, we purposely try to keep them to normal days and not go 15 hours a day. But also we'll mix sequences in dim, and we'll bring the levels down, and Dave and I try to maintain a certain peak in a film. Don't try to go to what the technology is allowing us to do. And then I think from the audience perspective, it's what we were talking about earlier in terms of creating highs and lows within the emotion and the arc of the whole film. A lot of that is to do with the pace of the picture editing, so that you get sequences that are full on in your face, and then we're into an office or a dialogue scene or a quieter moment. But then when it is full on for a long period of time, we're trying very hard to weave in and out of effects and music, especially, so that we can carry the emotion more than just a flat out furious car race at all times, because you just couldn't watch that. It's too much.
Even when we're racing, we're telling a story, so we're very plot heavy, even on just cars trying to beat each other in a race. There's a story going on that we're ever mindful of.
Well, and one of the things I didn't mention this before, but one of the things I think I really hand to you guys about this movie is they're long racing sequences, but I never lost the geography. I knew exactly where I was. I knew which car I was in. I knew, you guys did a really great job of guiding the audience through that experience.
And part of that is the editors. The editors did a great job. So we're really grateful to them for that.
As far as the car onboards went, you had all these mic angles, and were you trying to follow perspective when mixing, from the intake or from the muffler, everything following camera angles, or are you trying to get a nice kind of overall mix character of each car and trying to kind of follow that through? And how much of that was in the editing process, and how much of that was just having availability to mix, at the final?
It was always going for the sound of the car mostly, and what felt right for where we were. I had all the mics, so it was a matter of deciding what I wanted to use where and what I wanted to lean on. That was done more editorially than on the mix stage. I felt like I was pretty much there by the time I got to the mix stage, and then if I wanted to push something, I knew where to go for it.
We got time for one more question.
The film obviously already sounds amazing and different than a lot of other, race car films that we've seen throughout our lifetime. What, in your guys' opinion, on this film makes it different than all the, other dozens and dozens of race car films that we've seen in the last few decades? Did you purposely go into it thinking, okay, we're going to try something different, try not to sound like every other race car film, or did that just kind of like naturally evolve into that?
I'm going to give credit to our director, who did not want to make a race movie per se. When you ask him what this movie is about, he said it's about two men and their friendship and the struggle they had against the corporate structure that was trying to control their lives. And there's also cars in it, and I think that's how he approached the whole thing, so that when we actually do a race, it's in context, and we know why they're racing, we know who they're racing, we know what it means to the characters, and I think he brought that sensibility, mindful sensibility to us whenever we were doing any race scenes.
Yeah, I would say, for me, the main difference is a lot of other sort of racing movies. You can kind of tell that the characters were kind of an afterthought. Like, it's really just about how do let's get to the next racing sequence. But it's very different with Ford versus Ferrari. These are really great characters, and obviously, as you can tell, there are no finer actors. Like Christian Bale and Matt Damon are amazing in the film, and as well as the supporting actors as well. So that's all the time that we have. I want to thank these guys for coming out today and talking to us about Ford versus Ferrari.
Thank you.